I'm going to answer two questions. One is, how does AI licensing impact us as users, and what we want to understand about AI licensing as users and developers and product creators in this space, and also how this is going to help solve for world peace uh, in a bit. Okay, I hope that's got you sufficiently hooked. Now, before we get into what sounds like already legalese and everything, let's take a step back, right? What is licensing? Licensing is effectively terms of use. It's as simple as that. It's when I have something, or I've created something, and I'm going to set out the terms of which you can use this thing of my creation. What a license does is effectively highlight what is important to me, the creator, or the person who owns it. So, for example, if let's say I loan my car to Dushyant and say, the terms of the license are you are going to return it by Wednesday. That says that for me, it is important that Thursday the car is back in my hands. I've highlighted that this is the term of the license. If you're not doing it this way, you know what, you don't get the car because Thursday is important to me. That's literally all that a license does. Okay. And I want you to take that like concept, and I'm going to now walk a little bit through the whole AI licensing conversation and where it's been going. So first things first, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, because with the way that the recent AI development has happened, everybody's first instinct is to go open AI, open source AI, combination thereof, right? And I think we spoke about this last episode, where even the UN New Digital Compact talked about ONAI, just open artificial intelligence. And there's a lot more nuance in what that means and where that comes from. Let's take a step back, right? Open source software, a little bit of a history lesson. I started 30 years ago with effectively a bunch of people who were frustrated with lawyers, and they said, enough of this licensing jazz. We will not be beholden to the big tech, big sources, big pockets that be. And so our entire thing of making, in the creation of software, we are going to say that there is no secret sauce to this, or at least we are going to freely share the secret sauce. It does not, I want to clarify here, it does not change ownership. In fact, it highlights ownership. It says that I, as the owner, am making this source code openly available. And it is only me who can do this. I am now saying you can do a lot of things with it. But again, and I'm sure all of you folks who've worked with different open source licensing at some point, there are different variations of it. One is with attribution back. One is, like MIT licenses, do whatever you want. Some are Apache, which is like maybe not some things, maybe not commercial use, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a spectrum of open source licensing. There are some which, like the GPL, is more flexible for if you want to patent your end product. There are some which do not even require attribution. There are some which require you to maybe just attribute the source creator, and so on. So over there, the problem statement that was perceived was there is a certain colonization of the evolution of technology, and open sourcing software is the beat against it. It was kind of the rebellious move where they said, you know what, we are not going to say that everything can only be achieved through a commercial route. You don't have to cough up a whole bunch of money to get access to develop something and to advance technology. We are going to make this open source, right? That was the problem statement, and open source was the solution. Now, and of course, we have in that, just to kind of remind us, what was known as Freedom Zero, which is freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, which was Freedom Zero. That is the first thing. And then, of course, freedom to study how the program works and change it so you do your computing as you wish, freedom to redistribute and distribute copies of your modified version to others. These were in core the freedoms that open source was trying to get at and was trying to assure people who were using open source technology. Now, cut to how we are perceiving AI and what is open in AI, right? And already you can see that it's not a 2-mark answer anymore. It's a 10-mark answer. There are lots of nuance to this. I'm going to just put up a little bit of what was the open source initiative. They did come out with their definition of what counts as open. There are two versions of it, which is studying how the system works and its components, use the system for any purpose without having to ask for permission, modify to change its recommendations, predictions, and share the system with or without modifications, right? As you can see, it's basically just an evolution of the open source software freedoms. They've just like a little bit of fine tuning to make it more AI applicable, but this is in core still the freedoms that the open source AI is looking to grant you, right? And they are saying anything that does this works as open source AI. So far, we're on the same page, right? Open source software, tiny difference, open source AI, bada bing, bada boom, we're good. Now, why is this not so easy? And why have I decided to spend time bugging you guys about this? It's because AI and software are just two not the same things. Fundamentally, they are not as simplified. When you're talking about AI, source code is one tiny component of the entire damn thing. And this is when the Pandora's box starts opening up, right? Because when you're talking about the AI system, it includes, and somebody had actually listed this, tried to list it down. You have the AI solution or the algorithm, you have the training data, then you have the production data, which could be like your prompts at the point of trying to create the actual thing. Then you have the output data, and then you're even talking about like subsequent versions of the AI evolutions. But even just with this, even if we just do a freeze frame with this, with just the data and everything that's gone in, what is then copyrightable? What is subject to IP and to what extent? So far in our language and our learning, we were broadly able to make a distinction between a software program, like a source code, and the data that flows through the source code or flows through the program. We were able to understand it. At the very least, we were able to at least uniquely identify this source code or this program uses this data set, right? We were able to do like a 1:1 correlation. For example, it's not like LLMs are the first time we've had bots. We've had bots earlier, but it's just that those bots were trained on a very specific set of data. Trained is not even the right word, but they were running a script based on a very clear algorithm or a very clear data set. Now, the origin of the data and who owns the training data and then who owns the output have become very huge questions, right? And I know all of us, we've encountered this, we've come across a combination of all of these questions at some point. But I'll tell you how this impacts the licensing story. So, for example, I think even Llama recently went towards an end use restriction which was research oriented. Part of it, rather than saying it's for research, what I think they're trying to highlight is not for commercial purposes, because the training data is not that determinable or not that easily identifiable anymore. The training data is not procured through very clear licenses. That's what we're getting at. We're saying that in certain cases, they may not have complete confidence about the training data that has gone in. And so they cannot very clearly say, we have all of the copyright over the training data. So we have the ability to allow you to use this for commercial purposes. That clear chain of thought may not exist, or at least not with 100% confidence, which is why some of the subsequent licenses are moving towards use it for research purposes only, which is basically saying, do not commercially exploit this, because I cannot assure you that the core of it or the build up to this does not have any restrictions on this ground. Before I get into further chaos, is everybody with me? If you have any questions, please jump in. This is going to be a little bit of everywhere before we get to the promised land.
This is very helpful, Saranya. Thank you for clarifying this. See, many times what happens is that a lot of us have a background in technology and some of the licensing that has been used that we have understood when we started. But now there are new licensing terms, though they have similar naming conventions, but their actual purpose could be very different. So thank you for clarifying that. Even I learned something new, honestly, today. The second thing, there's a lot of example of Llama. There's a lot of noise about it, like why they change, and there's a lot of outburst in the And many times you kind of see a very strong stand about the organization that okay, they are not innovation friendly, they are not really kind of they're
Yeah.
creating this wall garden. But the nuances that you explained today, like they are being honest that I don't have a confidence in my own, so I
Yes,
don't want you to take a high risk on it. So I think
correct.
clarification was extremely helpful. Thank you for clarifying it. Appreciate it.
No, no, thank you. I mean, let's be clear. Far be it from me to be the advocate of big tech. I'm not, even though we've done that. I'm saying that there may be reasons, even ChatGPT, they moved from having relatively more open licensing to not so much anymore. And that is maybe them just trying to protect their IP. And you know what? That's completely fair. But I think this brings us to another question, which was clarified in, I think, one of the FAQs by Rail. And we'll, of course, discuss Rail. Of course, we have to in just a bit. Where they actually clarified that they do not care about open sourcing the source code because they're like, that's only part of it. Which brings us to the actual, what is the actual IP in an AI system, right? These are the questions, but let's say the weights, the parameters, that's the stuff that is the actual secret sauce. They're pretty relatively pretty chill about open sourcing source code, and they believe that that's not really which impacts it. And we'll also obviously we'll get to Rail in just a bit. So with all of this, I think another bit I want to capture, and maybe we should talk about it in subsequent conversations about the ownership of generated content, the delta in when you start learning things like you mentioned, Dishan. If I start adopting a foundation model, then where does the IP go? What is the IP source? What do I claim ownership of? Is it like ideally I claim ownership only the delta model improvements that I have worked on? The foundation model, of course, will retain with Microsoft in that case. And then what can I commercially exploit, right? And so on and so forth? Or is it just a thing of until nobody tells me to stop, I'm just going to keep doing what I want? These are the questions we have to get at. Which brings me to, of course, Rail, right? And as we all know, responsible AI licensing, which is the full form of the acronym Rail, has taken it as an end use licensing agreement, where their argument is that we are going to restrict the end usage of our AI systems. And they have different DAMs, they suggest different acronyms, or rather, different prefixes, rather, for the different systems. So they have Rail as the base concept. Then D is for data. So if you have D Rail, which is that this is going to manage an end use restriction of the data. A is for algorithm, M is for model, and S is for source code. So if you see any of these prefixes of D, A, M, S against a Rail license, that gives you an indicator of what that license is looking to restrict the end use of, right? Which is data, algorithm, model, source code, or something new that they're going to come up with eventually. Another fact is a bunch of other end use restriction licenses are also out there. I'm going to talk about them briefly before I double down on Rail. You have OPT 175B, which is again by Meta. This is a restrictive license enabling the use of model weights for research purposes while establishing a set of use restrictions. You have SEER, which does a very similar piece. You have one which is by the Tsinghua University in China, which is the GLM 130B license, which is a restrictive license enabling use of the model weights for research purposes. So as you can see, things are starting to get a little more nuanced. There's a very specific, they are getting very specific about what exactly they're licensing. What is the end use, which is in model weights, not for commercial purposes, for research purposes. And this is where the conversation is heading towards. So as you can see, Rail, like I mentioned, got into end use restrictions. And I'm going to look at this piece, which is the attachment A. And this, my friends, is how we're going to achieve world peace. Stay with me. Rail Rail's entire objective is we will determine that the AI models are not used for unethical or irresponsible end uses of AI. And they've tried to list out what they, to their mind, determine as ethical or responsible AI end usage. Check this out. Violates any laws, purpose of exploiting, harming, or attempting to exploit minors, verifiably false information, generate personal identifiable information, information that can disclaim that the text is machine generated, disparage, harass others, impersonate others, adversely impact an individual's legal right or otherwise creates modifying enforceable obligation, discriminating or harming individuals or groups, exploit any of the vulnerabilities of a specific group, has the effect of discriminating against individuals or groups, provide medical advice and medical results interpretation, generate or disseminate information for the purpose to be used for administration of justice, law enforcement, immigration or asylum processes. I want to take a freeze frame here and look at how the past 30 years have evolved. Just look at how far we've come. 30 years ago, the biggest problem that the OSS movement came out of thin air. FOSS was created as a rebellion against the biggest threat perceived to the advancement of technology at that age, which is there will be a walled gardens of money not allowing us to advance technology. That was the biggest threat perceived at that time. And look at where we are today. It has jumped from opening it out is the least of our problems. Let's run with that assumption. The IP protection is a different problem. Here, we are talking about what are the ways in which we can manage the end usage. It's no longer about IP. It's about how we are going to evaluate the usage of AI in our daily lives. It is about asylum processes and immigration and discriminating against individuals or groups. This is a very clear reflection of the worst case scenarios in our minds as technologists, as people in this space. This is actually the worst case scenarios of our time. But I will take a leaf from Dushyant's book today, and we're looking more optimistic than pessimistic. For me, this is a good thing, where the only way to start fixing the world is by knowing what the problems are. This has laid out a laundry list of some, even Rail admits, some of the worst case scenarios of where the technology can go. Once you realize that the problem statement is not about protecting IP, but the problem statement is about how intelligently, usefully, and conscientiously we will be able to use technology, then we are in the right direction of trying to see how best we can use it and how we can protect ourselves and the world around us in the usage of this technology. So today, I think licensing is going to help solve for world peace.
Super interesting, Saranya. One question, right? So for existing software, right? There's so much open source software, right? And we never talk about how it's used, right? There are always malicious actors using it for all kinds of different purposes, right? So it's a whole rethinking, right? I don't think we backport to existing software as it is. It should be for.
No, Soham, you are spot on. And I think that's exactly the point, right? The fact that, like I mentioned right at the beginning, licensing just highlights what you deem important at that time. It's just setting out, it's reflecting the creator's most urgent, most important objectives in sharing that with you. And I think it's a reflection of our times where open source was just saying it's openly shareable. As long as we are all sharing information freely, we are going to be fine. But here it's saying it's taking a whole different view of licensing. These are two completely different objectives and two completely different movements towards achieving those objectives. And they're not comparable at all. It's just saying that, and to my mind, this actually does not solve or address many of the IP conversations around AI. It does not talk about what about the source of data. It does not talk about that. It doesn't talk about anything else. And it's amazing that this is what has caught so much traction, where it doesn't talk about any of the earlier concerns that one usually has around licensing. It's taken a completely different view and saying, we have this as the most urgent problem, and that's what we're going to solve for. IP is somebody else's license. Talk to them. This is about ensuring that the end usage is going to be of a certain characteristic. And 100% to your point, why did earlier softwares, why wasn't this part of the consideration? 30 years ago, it's not that software could I create chaos with an Excel sheet? Hell yes. But there was no end-use restriction like this for Excel. Why has it come today? Why didn't it come then? And what's the difference? I think it's a reflection of our times. I think it's just about what the current conversation is and where we're going. And it's absolutely not one or the other. I think the way one would end up using it is there will be evolution in IP protection around AI, which is currently just completely inadequate. We do not have the vocabulary of adequately licensing a complex AI model. But that will be combined with an end use restriction like real. It will be combined with something else because AI is that, right? It's multiple building blocks. And I think licensing will also work in that way.